Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and welcome to the second video in the Beginner's Guide to Unity 6. In this tutorial we'll be covering textures, materials and prefabs. Remember to subscribe and click the notification bell to stay up to date with every tutorial I upload. Feel free to leave a comment and drop a like. I also have a Patreon page where you can help be a part of this channel, and you'll also find all the scripts and the assets to this series there too, along with plenty of other things. You can also now join as a free member. Now, on with the tutorial. So, we need to now import some assets into our game to actually make it look a little bit more like a game. How do we import? Well, it's actually very simple. But first, we need to ensure that our asset window down here in the project section is actually relevant to what we need. For example, if we click assets, we can see scenes. We have a scenes folder. We need to import textures, so let's create a textures folder. Right click, create folder. Call this textures. Hit return again, and you'll see this folder is empty. Let's import some textures. So if I go to a folder, select these three textures, and then drag and drop into Unity, it will import them as assets. I will leave a link in the pinned comment and in the description for you to click on, and you'll be able to download these textures absolutely free. Make sure you unzip them before you try importing them into Unity 6. So we now have these textures. They're not relevant too much at the moment, so let's create something to make them relevant. Let's create a ground object. So this will be an area that we will physically be able to walk on. We can go up here to Game Object, and then we can go down to 3D Object, and we can insert a cube. A cube is the simplest object that you can use inside Unity. You can manipulate these game objects to be relevant to what you want. For example, we want this to be a ground, so we want an area that we can walk around on. So let's manipulate this game object in the inspector panel to make it what we need it to be. Let's place it center of our scene. So 0, 0, 0 on the transform position. Next, we need to change the size. So we can change the scale. The scale represents the size. Let's have this as 20 by 20. So on the X, let's set this to 20. And on the Y, let's also set that to 20. Let's change our camera view a little bit so we can see inside a bit better. Let's zoom out. So right now, it does look like a huge tile. And we can use that to our advantage now. This is the object that we want to attach our materials onto and our textures. So we don't have materials at the moment. However, we can auto-generate one by dragging and dropping textures. So let's take this ground texture and drag and drop onto this cube. You'll see, nice and easy, that it does indeed appear on there. And in the meantime, you'll see a materials folder has been created. What can we do now? Well, let's actually rename this object to something more relevant rather than cube. So we can go to cube here in the hierarchy, press F2 or right click and rename, and let's call this ground. Next, let's make this look a little more like a ground rather than just a shiny surface with a texture on. If we zoom in, we can see, yes, although the texture looks okay, it looks a bit shiny, it doesn't look too much like a gravelly ground. How do we change this? Well, we can create something called a normal map. A normal map is a way of adding some slight 3D visibility to any texture. So if we take our ground here, hold Control on your keyboard and press D, it will create a duplicate of that ground. Next, over here in your inspector panel, you'll see a lot of different options to change and manipulate this ground 1 texture. Let's change that texture type from default to one of these. Let's change it to normal map, as that's what we're creating. If you select it, keep the texture shape as 2D, and then click on Create from Grayscale. And what this will do is it will give you the opportunity to evolve its bumpiness or its 3D visibility on the screen. Let's keep it at 0.25 and let's not worry too much about any of these other options just for now. We're just looking at the basics to Unity 6 to get something easily playable. All we need to do now is click Apply. It will change this texture to a 3D purple blue type texture. This now indicates that this particular texture can be applied to a material to give it a 3D effect. How do we do that? Well, if we go to our materials folder just here, you'll see that we now have this little orb here, and this represents a material. Just so we understand, a texture is never applied to a game object. A texture is applied to a material, and then that material is applied to a game object. So when we dragged and dropped our texture onto this game object here, the texture didn't go on it. Unity knew what we were trying to do, and it automatically created a material. It applied the texture to that material, and then applied that material to this game object right here. That's the beauty of some things with Unity. It knows what we're trying to do, so it preempts itself. So let's click on this ground material here, and you'll see a couple of different options inside this inspector panel. We can change a couple of different options here. We can change the colouring. For example, if we were to keep it pure white, it would just be the standard colour. However, if we change it to black, you wouldn't see anything. So keep in mind that the white and black represent not being able to see it and being able to see it fully. You can add a tint to it if you wanted to. So if we selected yellow from our ring and added a yellow variant, it would give it a yellow hue. I'm going to keep it as white. So I'm going to hold Control and press Z to undo that action. Next, we can change the metallicness of it so you can see how it would impact just by changing. Same with the smoothness. The smoother it is, the more you'll have light bouncing off it in certain points, as you can see here. I'm going to hold Control and press Z to undo. You can also change the source. This is not too relevant for us at the moment. However, let's keep it as albedo alpha for now. This relates to this right here. What is this right here? This is where our texture sits. So the texture that we dragged and dropped onto here, Unity automatically put it here for us and put the material on this object. How do we make it give it that 3D bumpy look? Well, we just need to make sure we're still clicked on our ground material, click on textures, and then drag and drop this ground one onto this little square here for normal map, like so. Now what we can do is play around more with the settings to give it more of a look that would make sense. At the moment, it is too intense for what we're trying to do. So we could change the normal map back to 0 to have it basically removed, but then set it to 0.25. And you'd see if we zoom out, it has now got a bit more of a shiny, bumpy, dirty look. So already this is looking more like you would see in a decent looking game. That now brings us back to changing the source from albedo alpha to metallic alpha. And you can see just by changing that one option how much of a difference this now has on our object. If we were to set our normal map back to 1, you would see that gritty look again. So my recommendation at this point is to play around with these options here from albedo down to normal map to get an object looking exactly how you would like it. Not every object will require the same settings. For example, if we were to set the metallicness higher, smoothness a bit lower, it would look somewhat like that. And I think that looks okay for now. Let's explore what we can do with other objects and other textures. Let's take this brickwork for example. How do we manipulate an object to have this brickwork looking nice? Well, let's go to Game Object again. Let's go to 3D Object and let's go to Cube once again. Let's set the position back to 0, 0, 0, which is dead center of our scene. And now what we'll do is let's hold Control on our keyboard and let's drag this out of the ground. And you'll see that it is moved by one whole block. We've been able to snap that, and now there should be no gap between this cube and the ground. But what can we do? It's a cube. Well, we could always do what we did before and drag and drop the texture onto this object, or we could create a material a different way. Let's go to materials, let's go to ground, hold control, press D, and let's rename that to brick. Now what we can do is let's change this our own way. Let's go to the albedo here, let's select the little button next to it, let's find brick and let's attach it. So we can select it right there, let's close, and now let's drag that material onto the cube we just created, like so. Let's rename this to brick. Let's change the size as well. Let's have this as, let's have it as 4 on the X and 4 on the Y. Let's turn our camera around this way using the mouse purely. Now, you can see right now that this brick looks okay. It looks a bit intense because that's got the wrong normal map on. How do we fix that? Well, let's go to our textures right here. Let's go to brick, hold control and press D to duplicate, and do what we did before with the ground. So we can change the texture type to normal map, click create from grayscale, and then click on apply at the bottom. And we just need to attach that normal map to our bricks. So let's go to materials, let's go to brick, and then let's select this button here, and then let's select brick. Now let's play around with this a little bit more. Let's change it to albedo alpha. Let's decrease the metallicness of it and decrease the smoothness just a little. And let's add the normal map to be 0.5. Now those bricks look dirty, gritty and quite nasty. And I think that looks good for what we're trying to do here. So let's now drag this brick out of the ground. So hold control and move it upwards. Let's change the scale to be 5 by 5. And let's move it to the edge of our area. So hold control again and drag this way. Now what we can do is bring it this way. And let's hold control and press D while we have brick selected here. That's created brick 1. Nothing has changed in the scene. However, if we drag and drop this way, we can see it's now been duplicated and we've started to get a brick wall. So at this point, we've learned how we can use textures and materials to create things inside our game. And indeed already, if I hold control, press D again to duplicate, we can create another one. We can already see that things are starting to take shape here. We've already created an area that looks okay for what we're trying to do, but there's so much more that we can do. So next time what we'll do is we'll look at something called prefabs as well as game objects. Remember to subscribe, click that notification bell as well to stay up to date with every tutorial, and I will see you next time.